In this course, I'm going to show you how to prepare for IELTS and achieve a band 7, 8 or even 9. It doesn't matter if you're a complete beginner, have failed the test before, or spent money on courses that didn't actually help. This is your step-by-step guide. It covers everything you need to know to be successful on the IELTS test: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Here's what makes this course different. I've been teaching IELTS for 20 years. I've seen every course, every method, every tip and trick that's out there. I've tested them all on thousands of students. I know exactly what works and what wastes your time. This 1-hour course offers strategy we normally charge hundreds or even thousands of dollars for. And you'll see real band 8 and 9 samples marked by ex-examiners. So if you want results, not more confusion, all you have to do is watch this video from start to finish. So let's get started. But before we get into the 4 skills, there's one thing about IELTS that most beginners don't understand, and that's the format of the test. The test is divided into 4 skills: writing, speaking, listening, and reading. We'll cover all those in this video, but a lot of people worry about whether they should do the academic test or the general training test, and what the differences are during your preparation between those two. So in general, the academic test is for people who are applying to go to university, and the general training test is for people who are just applying for immigration. But you personally, you might have a different variety of those. You'll still be doing the academic or the general training test, but you need to look up what your specific purposes are and look up with the body that you are applying to make sure that you're doing the right test. So for example, if you're a doctor, you're immigrating, but you might have to do the academic test. But you don't really need to worry too much about that for the purposes of this video or your preparation in general, because for both academic and general training, for the vast majority of the IELTS test and your preparation, it's exactly the same type of test and preparation. The speaking test is the same for general training and academic. Same with the listening test. Now the reading test is slightly different, but it's more to do with the style of reading texts. So for the academic, you will get academic style texts that you'll normally see in academic textbooks. And for the general training test, there'll be more everyday reading texts that you would see in everyday life. But for both academic and general training, it's the same styles of questions. So you're using the exact same strategies. Everything that we teach in this video applies to both. And then we come to writing. So writing is divided into task 2 and task 1. Let's look at task 2 first, because it's the thing that students worry about the most, but it's also the thing that is exactly the same for both academic and general training. For task 1 writing, it is very different for academic and general training. It is 2 completely different types, and we'll talk about that at the end of this video. So now you know the difference between academic and general training, and you know the different parts of the test. Let's jump into each of these. I would recommend, if you're a beginner, that you watch the whole video, or we have put timestamps. You can skip ahead to the area that you want to work on the most. If you want to just work on 1 or 2 areas, I would really recommend that you focus on the areas you feel that you are weakest in. Let's first jump into listening. The IELTS test is 30 minutes long, and it has 4 sections. So the 4 sections get progressively more difficult as you go through. So section 1 is quite easy. Section 4 is the most difficult. And the thing that is very different between the IELTS test and how students normally learn listening in the classroom is on test day, you will only hear the IELTS listening test once. When you are learning English in a classroom, your teacher will probably play a listening tape 2, 3, 4 times. That is very different from test day, where you will hear it once. And the thing that trips up many students is they are unfamiliar with the different types of questions that you might get. We're going to cover all of them, and I've also included all of them in this PDF guide for you. So this guide has everything that you need, and I'll show you how to get that later on in the video. But it's really important that you understand that there are 10 plus different types of questions in the IELTS listening test. So why do students struggle? Why do students who should be getting a band 8 or a band 9 end up getting a band 5 or a band 6? I know that you want me to tell you what to do that just automatically boosts your score, but the way that I teach is I teach things that work, things that you should do, but I also teach things that you should not do. The things that you should not do are actually more effective at boosting your score, because imagine you're walking through a minefield. I am the person telling you, don't step there. If you step there, you're going to step on the mine. You need to be aware where the mines are so that you can make it to the other side of the minefield. So the big problem for the IELTS listening test is you're not just listening. You have to do multiple different things all at the same time. You need to read the question, so you're listening and reading. You need to listen carefully, which involves a lot of focus. Then you need to write your answer. So you're reading, listening, focusing, writing. You're also thinking. You might be predicting what may be coming up next. And you're managing your time. You're thinking about the next question coming up. So there are multiple things happening at the same time. And that is very, very difficult for many people. But it is not difficult if you know how to handle it. So let's think about what successful students do. What do they do differently? Well, one of the things that successful students do is they try and master each section, and they don't really worry about mastering the next section until they've really nailed the first section. Because as I said, it gets progressively more difficult. So section 1 is just the basics. If you're aiming for a band 7, 8, or 9, you should be getting 100% here. The best students that I've worked with will focus in on section 1 first. Make sure they're getting 100% there. Then they will do section 2, section 3, and they won't worry about section 4 until they've mastered the previous sections. So there are 3 things that the most successful students do differently from all other students. And we're going to cover each of these in more detail. Number 1, they listen actively, not passively. They use different strategies for different question types. Again, I'm going to give you all of those strategies in the PDF ebook. And during their practice, they listen just once. They make it a little bit difficult for themselves. So active listening, what does this actually mean? What's the difference between active listening and passive listening? Passive listening is just listening and only half listening, how you would watch TV, for example. Active listening is listening and doing something else at the same time. Let's look at some examples here. So imagine you're watching a TED Talk. Passive listening would be just watch the TED Talk and then just listen. Active listening would be making notes. What are the key points? Can you summarize those key points or the key vocabulary that they're using to express their points? Now, you don't have to do all of these things, but if you were watching a TED Talk, for example, and you were doing those things, you're not only improving your IELTS skills, your listening skills, but you're also improving your ability to make arguments, which will become useful later on in the writing test, and also improving your vocabulary at the same time, which improves all aspects of English and your IELTS results. So next time you're listening to a podcast, watching a movie, watching YouTube, whatever you're doing, it could even be making notes on this video. Do something extra. It is going to hone all of those skills, those sub-skills that you will need on test day. The second thing that the best students are aware of and the best students do is they know that there are different types of questions and these require different strategies. So for example, you might get a multiple choice question. What a multiple choice question is doing is asking you to differentiate between the meaning of different words. Form completion. It requires different skills. It is asking you to read and predict what might come up and then identify those things that you predict. Maps require you to visualize a map and think about walking through an area. And sentence completion involves grammar and prediction. So all these different types of question require different skills and require different step-by-step strategies. If you go and look in the description of this video and also the pinned comment, you'll be able to get this ebook. This ebook is only normally shared with our VIP students, and it is every question and every step-by-step strategy all in one ebook. And you might look at that, like when you download it, you'll see like that seemed like a lot of work. The worst thing that you can do is go into the test with one strategy, for every type of listening question. It is hard work to learn those strategies and, get these books and practice using them. But what is more work is going in, doing the test, paying your money, the scores come back and you haven't got the score that you needed. That is stress. That is a lot of hard work and a lot of wasted money. Don't do that. And then the third thing that the best students do is they listen just once in practice. So I've said this before, in English class, your teacher is trying to help you by letting you listen 3 or 4 times to things, but they're actually hurting you. Because we have a saying at IELTS Advantage, train hard, fight easy. Comes from the army. Many of your armies will train very, very hard during peacetime because they know when they go to war, it makes fighting much, much easier. We believe in doing the exact same thing. When you're practicing, make it difficult, make it challenging. You want the most difficult thing you've ever experienced to be your actual preparation where it is safe to make mistakes than on test day when it is deadly to make mistakes. So let's look at a real question, a multiple choice question. And let's look at why strategies are very, very important. So this comes from these books, and in it, the 3 choices were economy, standard, and premium. So your task is to look at this and choose the correct answer. So we have a 5-step strategy for multiple choice. First one is read the instructions carefully. A lot of students who should be getting a band 8 or band 9 simply just don't read the instructions. It tells you exactly what to do, and if you don't do what they say, you lose marks. Then we need to differentiate between the different keywords. So for this question, we had economy, we had standard, and we had premium. So what you need to do is think about the difference between these 3 words. So the thing that I would notice is economy and standard are synonyms. And these generally mean cheaper, whereas premium means more expensive. And that brings us on to the next step, which is thinking of synonyms that might come up. So premium might be something like first class. It might be something like expensive. It might be something like the top option. Economy might be cheapest, or it might be something like third class. Standard might be something like normal. We're doing all of this before we hear the actual recording so that when something comes up, it probably won't say premium. It'll probably say something like first class. We need to be thinking about this before we actually hear what is going to happen, what is on the recording, so it makes it much, much easier for us to find the correct answer. Then we would listen to the whole thing. So when we are listening to the whole thing, they might actually change their mind. They might actually say, can I get the premium ticket or the first class ticket? And then the person on the line says, yeah, that'll be $5,000. Oh, do you have something cheaper? Yeah, we have our standard class. That's a little bit cheaper. Okay, I'll actually choose this one. And this one is the correct answer. But if you just put down the first thing you hear, which is premium, then you're going to choose the wrong answer. That's a very common mistake that a lot of people make with multiple choice. This is why these step-by-step strategies are so valuable, because we have gone through them with thousands of students. We know exactly what they're thinking. We know exactly what the common mistakes are. So they're designed to kind of force you to do the right thing. And then very, very importantly, just keep going. The exam will not stop. The recording will not stop. It's very, very different with reading that way. When you're doing the reading test, if you get stuck on a question, it's not a big problem. You can really focus in on that question and try and find the correct answer. But if you were listening and they were talking about premium and cheaper or standard, and you just really had no idea, and then they go on to talk about something else and you get lost, you've not only messed up that question, but you're probably going to mess up the questions that come next. But by following these step-by-step strategies, it reduces the chances that you will get lost. On test day, during the listening test, getting lost is one of the biggest reasons why students who should be getting a high score get a lower one. By learning these strategies, you're reducing the likelihood that you will get lost, therefore increasing the likelihood that you will get the score that you need. But remember, all of the questions have different strategies. So don't look at this one and think, I'm just going to do that for every type of question. A maps question, a sentence completion question, Very, very different. But now you might be thinking, okay, I have these strategies. I want to practice. This brings us on to the biggest problem that we see, which is how you practice. You could download this and you could memorize these step by step. But if you don't practice, but more importantly, you don't practice properly, you won't get as high a score as you really should. So how do successful students actually practice? They only use official real tests. The only official real tests are produced by Cambridge, the British Council, and IDP. Those are the only three sources that you should use. I do not have any affiliation with Cambridge or the British Council or IDP. I'm not sponsored by them, but you should only use real tests. Stuff that you find on the internet, 99% of it is fake and unreliable. By unreliable, I mean that it is either way too difficult or way too easy. These are the only tests that will give you a good idea of what your actual score is and if you're ready, because they are the right difficulty. Successful students also practice these tests under exam conditions. They don't use notes, they don't cheat, they have a stopwatch beside them, they don't listen to the test multiple times, they always do it under exam conditions, and they only listen once. They also mark accurately. When you are looking at the answers at the end, not during the test, it might say something like the answer was flowers, Flowers, and you wrote flower. That is wrong, because the answer is flowers with an S. What unsuccessful students will do is they'll give themselves that mark and they'll be like, oh, during practice, I'm consistently getting a band 9. And then they go and do the test and they get a band 6.5. That's because you were being too easy on yourself. Key thing that they do, and this is the most important, is they analyze every single mistake. What they do is the most successful students don't start off successful students. They start off getting 6.5 or getting a band 7, but they ruthlessly analyze every single error that they make, and they will look for patterns. So they'll think like, am I always getting multiple choice questions wrong? They fix that. Or am I always getting spelling mistakes? And that's leading to lower scores. They fix that. They find the actual problem and they fix that problem, and they consistently get better. The last one, they build endurance. Focusing for 30 minutes in English, which is not your native language, is very, very difficult. But what unsuccessful students do is they tend to try it once and then say, oh, it's just too difficult. Whereas the most successful students that I've worked with will try and focus for 10 minutes and then they'll lose focus and they'll say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do it for 15. And then the day after, 20, 25. It's like going to the gym. You don't go in and try and lift the heaviest weight. You start off small and you build up over time. If you would like a much longer, more detailed course with a free, reliable practice test at the end, so you can put all of this into practice, in either one of these corners, I'll get the team to put a little pop-up. Click on that, and that will bring you to a much longer, more detailed video on listening, including a free practice test. So you should have downloaded the PDF. If you want more practice, you can click on that longer video. But let's move on now to reading. What we're going to cover today is the big myths, common advice that students believe about the test that doesn't actually work. Then we'll look at the real difference, what really separates out the people who struggle with the IELTS test to the people that easily get a band 7, 8, or 9. And then we'll look at step-by-step strategies that you can use to apply to all the different types of questions on test day. So the biggest myth about IELTS reading and IELTS in general is just practice more. All you have to do is just practice and you will magically get the score that you need. Let's look at why that is wrong, because many of you watching might completely disagree with that. So I want to tell you about two of my friends, Johnny and Emma. Johnny is a farmer. His dad was a farmer. He grew up on a farm. His dad had an old car. And since Johnny was like 9 years old, Johnny has been illegally driving his dad's car around his farm. And then we have Emma. Emma is my other friend, and she never touched the steering wheel of a car. She never learned how to drive until she was 18. And she got a driving instructor to tell her exactly what to do. Who do you think failed their test and who do you think passed their test? Johnny with 10 years, a decade of driving experience, or Emma with 6 weeks of driving experience? You've guessed it, Johnny failed multiple times and Emma passed first time. Why was that? Even though Johnny had hundreds, even thousands of hours of practice. Well, Johnny had never been taught how to drive properly. He had been driving incorrectly, practicing the wrong thing, ingraining those bad habits for years and years and years. This is exactly the same with many, many students. They go onto YouTube, they get some tips and tricks that don't actually work. They practice using those tips and tricks, and their reading skills get worse, not better. The second big myth that I see, very, very common advice, is all you need are time management tips, and this is magically going to improve your score. This is completely wrong. Why? So you'll probably recognize this guy, Usain Bolt. He was the fastest man in the world. Remember when Usain Bolt won the gold at the Olympics? The night before, did he go on to Google and Google time management tips? No. Why did he win gold? Because he was better at running than all these other guys. These other guys weren't bad at time management. They were worse at running. He was the best runner, therefore he finished the race in the fastest time. This is exactly the same with the IELTS reading test. I did the test, the real test, and I got band 9 in reading, of course, because I'm a native English speaker. Of course, I should get a band 9. But I did it in 20 minutes. How did I do it in 20 minutes? Through time management techniques? No, I'm just really, really good at reading in English. So you don't have a time management problem. You have a reading skills problem. You need to address the actual problem and fix the problem that you actually have in order to improve. The third big myth that I see is skimming and scanning. When I got a new class, when I used to teach 16 students in the classroom, first question I asked at the start of the first reading class, I would say, what's the key to getting a high score? Hands would go up. It would always say skimming and scanning. And then I would give them a practice question and say, okay, just skim and scan and find the correct answer. None of them were able to do that. Why did you think that was the correct answer? Well, that's what everybody says. Well, what everybody says is not necessarily the thing that you should be doing. The average reading score worldwide is a band 6. If the common advice was correct, the average score would be much, much higher than a band 6. So many of you might disagree, so let me demonstrate this to you. I want you to imagine that we are in a helicopter and we're flying over New York. And I say to you, your task is to find McDonald's in Times Square. So we're flying over Manhattan here. Here's Lower Manhattan. We have New Jersey out here. We have Queens. We have Brooklyn. We have different areas. Skimming is just getting a general idea of where you are. It is giving you a general idea of what the reading text actually means. So we're flying over here. We have a general idea that we are in the correct place. But can you see McDonald's? No, we are too far up. So skimming helps, but it doesn't help you find the correct answer. We land the helicopter. You still have the task of finding McDonald's in Times Square. Scanning, does that help you find the correct answer? Well, scanning helps you find the general location, the correct paragraph, the correct area. It doesn't actually help you find the correct answer. So if we look here, we know we're generally in Times Square. Okay, this looks like Times Square, but where's McDonald's? Scanning just tells you you're in the right area. You're getting warmer. Close reading is the skill that actually gets you the correct answer. And it's one that is very, very rarely taught in most IELTS classrooms. And if you didn't use that skill, you would just be flying around New York or flying around America, not really knowing what to do. That's what most students do on test day. They're just looking at stuff and not really knowing where the correct answer is. And most classrooms will only teach you 2 reading skills. They'll teach you skimming and they'll teach you scanning. We actually teach 5. So number 1, understand the question. Simply, if you do not understand the question type, what it is telling you, the instructions, you will never be able to answer it correctly. We do teach skimming, we do teach scanning, then close reading. Carefully analyzing the text, carefully thinking about it once you have found the area that you're looking for. And then very, very importantly, but often overlooked, is deciding the correct answer. So you might have, okay, could be this or it could be that. multiple choice, for example, or true, false, not given, we need to logically think through and use a system for finding the correct answer. Okay, so what you might be thinking now is, you said system, you said strategy, just teach me one system and I can go in and magically get a band 9. I wish that were true. If it were true, my life would be much easier and I would give it to you. But unfortunately, or I think fortunately, there are different question types and they are testing different things. And we have step-by-step strategies for all of those different question types. I'm going to give them to you. It's actually in this ebook that you can download. You can go to the description and we give you the full ebook that has every single question and every single step-by-step strategy. We normally only give that to our VIP students, but you can get it for free today. But let's look at why this is really, really important, because some of you might download that ebook and skim through it and not really understand what you need to do. Let me explain the why you need different strategies for different question types. So I want you to imagine that we are in New York. I say to you, you're going to go to Las Vegas and I am going to go to Seattle. Would we travel along the exact same route? Would we use the same strategy to get there? Of course not. But that's exactly what many IELTS students do. So there are different question types that require different strategies, but they're all following the same route and they end up getting very, very different answers. So just like New York, Seattle, Las Vegas are very, very different places, here are 3 different question types. And I want to show you how different these are. So matching headings, what it is asking you to do with the matching headings question is understand the main ideas and the paragraph. So to look at paragraphs and understand the general meaning of each paragraph. True, false, not given, what it is testing is something completely different. It's actually the opposite. What they're testing is, can you closely read things within that paragraph and then logically analyze the different question options? And then multiple choice is careful comparison between different things, but also the elimination of different distractors, really focusing in on what the question is actually asking you and what the correct answer might be. 3 completely different questions requiring 3 completely different strategies. So let's look at the strategy for matching headings contained within this ebook. So what skills are being tested here? Understanding the main idea, quickly understanding the general meaning, and differentiating between 2 or more similar headings. So the common problems are, there's a lot of information to process. It takes quite a lot of time if you try and understand every single word. There are a few other little problems, but that's the main one. So let me show you a strategy that we've developed for matching headings that helps you overcome all of these problems. So what I want you to do is ignore all of this. I want you just to focus in on this paragraph, paragraph D. So what we're not going to do is we're not going to look at the headings. So most people will first look at the headings, they'll kind of get lost, or they'll read every single word and waste a lot of time. What I want you to do is just focus in on D, and I want you to create a title. So if you had to write a title for this, what would it be? So pause the video, read this, and create your own title, and I'll do the same. So what I'm going to put here for my title is kind of something like a large proportion of world population affected by water problems. So it might not say that in the actual headings. It might be something different, but large, big, proportion, number, population, people are affected, afflicted by these issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the list of headings and I'm going to see, are there any that are similar to this? So finance, no. Benefit, no. No. Customers, no. It's not talking about customers. What makes the device different? No. Cleaning water from a range of sources? No. Overcoming production difficulties? No. Profit, not the primary goal? No. A warm welcome for the device? No. This is not looking good. The number of people affected by water shortages? None of these match this. This one, 10 at the bottom, is the correct answer. So 17D, we're going to put 10. Let's check the correct answer. As you can see, 17X, correct answer. How easy was that? That took 30 seconds and you were able to immediately find the correct answer using the strategy that we teach. That's the exact same strategy as is included in the ebook. But even students who download the PDF, learn all of the strategies, some of them still have issues. Well, what we discovered is that The IELTS reading test is not actually a reading test. It's something different. I'll show you what it is here. The title will kind of give it away. The reading test is not a reading test. Why? Well, have a look here. These are real question words and real words in the text from real tests that actually happened. So here in the question, it talked about civil calendar, but in the text, it talked about municipal calendar. Months were in equal length, 12 months of 30 days. Divided the day into 2 equal halves, split the day into 12-hour periods. 2 equal halves of a day, 12-hour periods. You're probably starting to see that the reading test is not just a reading test. It is a vocabulary test. It is a synonyms test. Civil and municipal, equal length, 30 days within a month. These are all synonyms or paraphrasing. If you do not understand the meaning of these words, you will not be able to find the correct answer. Therefore, what we do is we help our students improve their vocabulary. And the beauty of this strategy is if you improve your vocabulary, you improve not just your reading score, but your listening score and your speaking score and your writing score all at the same time, because vocabulary is one of those foundation systems that improves everything. But like everything, the IELTS test, there's a right way and a wrong way to improve your vocabulary. The wrong way to improve your vocabulary is to do things like this. Memorizing word lists, they just go in one ear and out the other. Using flashcards with no context doesn't really help you remember anything if there's no context around it, because you'll just forget everything quickly. And flashcards and memorizing long lists just leads to demotivation. People can do it for 10 minutes, they can't do it for 10 weeks. So what we discovered was a far more effective way. It's our vocabulary improvement plan. There's scientific research out there that suggests that the maximum number of words that human beings in any language can learn in one day is between about 8 to 12. Once you start going past 12 new words, your brain kind of fills up and you need a little bit of rest, and the next 24-hour period you can fill that up a little bit more. What that means is you need to learn vocabulary over a long period of time, weeks and months. How do we get students to do that? By reading and learning what they love. My little boy loves Japanese manga. I would get him to read that. My wife loves cooking, so I would get her to read cookbooks. And what that forces you to do is learn words within context. When we see a word that we don't understand, we underline it, we look at the other words around it, and we guess the meaning based on that. That's exactly the same way babies and children learn the English language. Again, everything is based on real research of what actually works within language acquisition. And that means that you retain the vocabulary, you actually remember it. Because if my little boy is, and this is how I actually teach him, I get him to read about manga and find new words and find vocabulary. I get him to write essays about that thing because he's going to retain all of this information. He's going to naturally do it without even knowing about it. And then he looks forward to actually practicing. So here's the vocabulary improvement plan. You can download this, but you can look through it step by step. It is pretty great. We love it and our students love it. And the most important thing is get a little notebook and just add new stuff to it every day. And within weeks, within months, you have a full notebook full of new words, and it makes everything much, much easier. Now, that was a very quick run through IELTS reading. I do actually have a much more detailed course, and I have actually made it free for you. If you want that, it is in the description. It's our IELTS reading challenge, our free IELTS reading challenge. It is a 3-module course. It's about 90 minutes to 2 hours long, so a lot more detail. So if you do really need more help, that is a great opportunity for you to do that in even more detail. Click on that, add your email, and you can gain access to that off YouTube. So now you're more comfortable with everything to do with IELTS reading. Let's move on to speaking. Let's start off by talking about the structure of the speaking test. It's really important that you understand the difference between parts 1, 2, and 3 of the test because they're very different, have very different types of questions, and require a different approach. Part 1 starts off quite easy. They're going to ask you things about yourself. It is all about you, and you are the world's leading expert on you, so it's pretty much impossible to get these questions wrong. They're going to ask you normal everyday questions that you might ask someone when you first get to know them. What's your job? Where are you from? What do you like to do on the weekend? What are your hobbies? That will take about 4 to 5 minutes for part 1, and depending on the length of your answers, the examiner will normally ask you about 3 to 4 different topics and let's say 10 to maybe 12, 13, 14 different questions. Then we move on to part 2, and part 2 is very different from part 1. Part 2 is known as the monologue. Monologue means that you are just speaking. It is not a interaction with the examiner. For part 2, they will show you a cue card and there will be a topic on the cue card and they will give you 1 minute to prepare and then ask you to speak solo for up to 2 minutes. So very, very different from part 1. So you'll speak for about 2 minutes and then the examiner will stop you and then they'll move on to part 3. Part 3, again, very, very different. So part 1 is all about you. It is a discussion of you, whereas part 3 is more an abstract discussion of general ideas. Part 1, they might ask, what do you like to do on the weekend? That is about you. Whereas part 3, they will discuss the ideas of weekends. So they might say, how has what people do on the weekend changed over the years? That is not really a discussion of you. You can include examples of your own life and things that you like to do, but it's more a academic style discussion of the idea of weekends. But before we get on to the different strategies for the different parts, the most important thing that you need to understand for both the speaking test and the writing test is the marking criteria. Now, online, you'll hear a lot of people say it depends on what examiner you get, or certain countries or certain examiners are easier than others. This is not correct, because every examiner uses these 4 marking criteria. They literally have a sheet of paper beside them when they are listening to you. They mark you on this sheet of paper to make the test as fair and as objective as possible. And so it's absolutely essential that you know the rules of the game. Imagine you are learning to play a new sport and you don't learn the rules, you'll never be able to excel at that sport or even play that sport properly. They look a little bit complicated, but they're not really that complicated. So the first one is fluency and coherence. Let's split those two out a little bit. What does fluency mean? Fluency does not mean speaking quickly. I am speaking to you, hopefully, quite fluently today, but I'm not speaking quickly. What I try to do is to speak smoothly, without unnatural pausing and hesitation. Think of fluency as how smooth your speech is. And then coherence, think of it in simple terms as, did you answer the question and does the examiner understand what you think about that question? Then we have vocabulary. Vocabulary are the words, the content words that you use within your answers. A lot of people think that the key to success is using as many high-level or impressive words as possible. The best way to think about vocabulary is for each question that the examiner asks you, do you have enough vocabulary to answer that question or not? And are those words accurate or not? And very, very similar case with grammar. So it's not about how many crazy grammatical structures and how many tenses you can squeeze into one answer. It is about, do you have enough grammatical structures? Can you use enough tenses to answer each of the different types of question? And when you use that grammar, are you using it accurately or not? And then the final one is pronunciation. They're all important, but pronunciation, I think, is probably the most important one. If you have poor pronunciation, it doesn't matter how good your vocabulary is, it doesn't matter how good your grammar is or how smoothly you speak, the examiner will not be able to understand you. Now, pronunciation is not about speaking like a British person. It's not like sounding like the King of England or sounding American or anything like that. It is just about speaking clearly in your own accent. So over the last 20 years of teaching IELTS speaking and working with thousands of students at a band 7, 8, and 9 level, what I tried to do with this lesson is kind of boil it down to the key things that are the difference between someone struggling with speaking and someone getting like a band 8 or a band 9. So there's a few different principles. Principle number 1 is the students that really do well, they will have a different strategy for part 1 and then a different one for part 2 and then a different one for part 3. So let's talk about each of those strategies, and then you can learn them and use them yourself in the test. Okay, so we talked about the different types of questions that we might get in part one. Let's think about why they are asking you questions about yourself. Well, this is really to put you at ease. It wouldn't be fair if you walked into the room and they said immediately something like, let's discuss how AI will change education in the next 30 years. You're like, oh, that was quite abrupt. So they'll ask you things like, where are you from? What's your job? To let you ease into the test and let you get comfortable. You shouldn't feel as if you need to impress the examiner, and you shouldn't feel as if you need to overthink this at all. Just be yourself. So how you should approach this is they ask you a question. Think about first, how do I directly answer this question in the first sentence? You would then give some kind of extra information. That could be an explanation, an example, or a personal story. Imagine you are speaking to a friend or a colleague in a coffee shop. That is the kind of tone and the kind of answer that you want to give. What you shouldn't do, and this is a big mistake that I see students making, is they try and count the number of sentences, or even worse, count the number of words. You do not want to be thinking of other things other than just talking to the examiner. Our brains are not very good at multitasking. It doesn't really matter if you use 2 sentences, 3 sentences, 4 sentences, 5 sentences for part 1, as long as you do those 2 things, which is answer the question directly and then add a little bit more detail. If you want to see what this looks like in real life, what I've done is I have conducted lots of mock speaking tests with many students. I've put them into one playlist for you on YouTube. If you want to do that, just go to the description, click on the speaking mock test playlist, and you can bookmark that and go and look at that later. Next, they will give you a cue card. Let me show you what a cue card actually looks like. Part 2 is this inside the box. So this represents the card here. So here we have the topic. And then here we have bullet points, or just the different points that they ask you to talk about. The big mistake that I see students making is they talk about bullet point number 1, then they talk about bullet point number 2, then they talk about bullet point number 3, and then they talk about bullet point number 4. You do not have to do that. You can do that if you want, but what it says is you should say, not you must say. What you must do is you must always talk about the main topic. The reason why I don't like this just follow the bullet point strategy is you will get to one bullet point that you don't feel comfortable talking about, and that will affect your fluency. Or you will go through each bullet point in about 30 seconds, and then after 30 seconds or 60 seconds, you will have nothing else to talk about. And you must talk for up to 2 minutes. That is a really key part of part 2. So our strategy is to help the student focus on the main topic and then create your own bullet points. So look at the 4 bullet points and think, okay, I want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about that one. I want to talk about that one, but I don't want to talk about that one. But what I would also like to talk about is, and you create your own points to talk about. Now you could talk about the past, the present, the future, an interesting story, something you disagree about, something you agree about. Again, if you want to see what that looks like, go and look at the playlist. Go to part 2, listen to a few of them, and see how the students that really nail it, the students that get band 9, what they do. So let's move on to part 3. The thing to remember about part 3 is you need to extend your answers a lot more than normal. So this strategy that I'm about to give you kind of forces you to do that. What you do first is you directly answer the question. What happens with a lot of students in part 3 is sometimes the questions can be a little bit more complicated than they're used to, or about a topic they don't know much about, and they will kind of ramble on and talk about many things but never really answer the question. Best thing to do to avoid that is give an answer right away. Then give an explanation. Why do you think that? Or why do other people think that? Remember that this is a discussion of ideas. It is not just about you. So you can answer the question and say, I think this because, or you could say, I suppose other people think this because, and then give an example. This can be an example from your own life. It is fine to talk about personal examples, things that you've actually experienced. And then if you want to extend it even more, what you can do is show the other side. A great way to give a very extensive answer is to directly answer the question and say, well, some people think this. Here's why they think this. Here's an example of that thing. But there are other people in the world who think this. They think the opposite. And here's why they think that. And here's an example of that. And then at the end, give your own opinion. The next principle that I have found that separates the successful students with the less successful students is they focus on being as natural as possible, not trying to be perfect or sound like a robot. What do I mean by that? Well, if you go and look at the playlist, I'm sorry that I keep saying this, but speaking is one of those things where it's better for you to see rather than just study it. If you look at the difference between someone who's at a 6 or 6.5 and somebody who's at a band 9 answers actually sound more like a normal conversation. And this is intentional. What you will see in the marking criteria is they talk about effort a lot. Band 9 sounds effortless. They are able to just answer any topic effortlessly because their English is at such a high level. Now, this is really, really important because what a lot of students believe is the more perfect your answer, the more advanced vocabulary and grammar and perfect fluency, the higher your score. It actually leads more time than not to lower scores because you sound very robotic. You sound like you're preparing an answer. Whereas band 9 students, it's like talking to someone in a coffee shop. And the big mistake that we see are rehearsed answers. So it's like if I gave you a speech and I put you on stage in front of hundreds of people, would you sound natural? Would you sound fluent? I know the temptation that you have where you just memorize stuff. It actually creates more problems. The examiners are trained to spot memorization. It is immediately obvious that you have memorized an answer, so don't do it. You will get a much lower score than if you just answered them naturally. And that brings us on to principle number 3, fluency beats perfection. What a lot of you are trying to do when you're memorizing answers or preparing in such a way is to try and become perfect. No speech, no conversation is perfect, but there are a lot of speeches, band 9 speeches, which are very, very fluent. And it's really important that you understand this principle of fluency is more important than accuracy. Many of you come from education systems, and I'm not saying one education system or one country is better than the other. I'm just dealing with the reality that some education systems will emphasize perfect grammar, perfect vocabulary. Accuracy is the most important thing. Whereas there are other education systems in the world that when they're teaching languages, they accept that there will be errors. And it is far more important than for students to produce the language and make mistakes and get more fluent. For the IELTS test, it is about a balance between the two. You cannot just go in and be 100% fluent and, every grammatical structure and word you say is inaccurate. That's not going to happen. But what is more a problem is that students are so focused on getting everything perfect that their fluency really, really suffers. If I was to give you advice, I would say focus more on fluency than getting everything perfect. Because even if you look at the marking criteria, it does accept that even at band 9, people will make little slips with grammar, with vocabulary, because it understands that's how even native speakers speak. I might have even made a few grammatical slip-ups during this video. That is fine. That is how everyone speaks. And if you don't believe me, here's a little exercise that you can do. Get some practice questions, get your phone, and record yourself answering the same questions twice. So what you can do is the first time you answer the questions, focus on grammar and vocabulary and focus on being as accurate as possible. Try to make no mistakes at all. Then the second time, answer the same questions and forget about grammar, forget about vocabulary. Just try and be as fluent as possible. And then analyze your responses and pick out how many grammar and vocabulary mistakes that you actually made. What you will see, because I've done this thousands of times, is when you don't focus on grammar, don't focus on vocabulary, you actually make fewer grammar and vocabulary errors, and you're way more fluent. And then principle number 4 is all about vocabulary. In general, the students that get the highest marks, the band 8s, the band 9s, they use natural vocabulary. They never learn lists of vocabulary. So in 20 years of teaching IELTS, I have never met a student at a band 5 or a band 6 level that has jumped to a band 7, 8 or even 9 level by learning band 9 vocabulary lists. It just doesn't work. Or trying to insert an idiom into every sentence. Or never repeating words. Band 9 students repeat words all the time. Or trying to use as much academic vocabulary as possible. Remember at the start of the video, we talked about the academic test and the general training test are exactly the same for speaking. It is not testing how many academic words you know because it is not an academic test. It is a normal, everyday English speaking, how good is your communication test. So what actually does work? The best students, the students that have improved to a band 9, they improve their vocabulary naturally. And they do that through reading and listening, not learning lists, and following our vocabulary improvement plan. Our vocabulary improvement plan plus lots more detailed stuff is included in our full free speaking course. If you want that, all you have to do is just go to the description, find the link that says free speaking course, click on that, give us your email, and we'll send you instant access, and it will give you our full vocabulary improvement plan. And when those students learn new vocabulary, they don't just memorize the word and never know how to use it. They master the pronunciation, the collocations, they master the usage. How do you actually use that word appropriately within a sentence? Because remember, it is a speaking test. It is not a vocabulary test or a memorization test. Memorization and communication are two very different things. In many ways, they are the opposite of one another. And this is a very, very important point here. They only use words they 100% understand. We call it the 100% rule on our VIP course. Every time we're giving one-on-one feedback to students, we're saying like, only use words you're 100% sure of the meaning, the pronunciation, the collocations, the usage. It is better to use a simpler word that is correct than a more advanced word that is incorrect. And then once they have followed our vocabulary improvement plan and they have their notebook, a lot of them just will have a simple notebook like this, just full of new words. They actually take these new words maybe once a week and they try and use them in their practice answers. They try and use them in their essays. They try and use them in everyday speech when they're speaking English. As we have a saying on our VIP course, you either use it or lose it. If you're interested in our VIP course where you get one-on-one feedback on your speaking, we will create a personalized study plan for you. We will support you step by step with everything. Go to the link in the description and get 10% off today. And that brings us on to principle number 5. The students that see the biggest progress actually get feedback on their speaking. Now, I'm not saying this because I want to sell you our courses. We have a very limited number of teachers that can give feedback, so we only have a very small number of spaces and they always sell out. I'm not saying this to you to try and sell you stuff. I'm saying this to you because it is a fact. If you don't believe me and you don't think that you need feedback, you know, that's like saying, I feel ill, but I don't want to go to the doctor. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And the reason why feedback, one-on-one feedback on your speaking is so effective is you don't know what you don't know. You are probably making multiple errors and no one is going to tell you those errors unless they sit with you and they hear you speaking or it's over Zoom or whatever. But it's important that the person giving you feedback understands IELTS, that they are an ex-examiner, that they are either a native speaker or they speak English to an extremely high level because they need to spot what are your common grammar errors. For example, if you're a Russian student or Ukrainian student, you don't have articles in your native language. It is highly likely that every time you use articles, which are in every sentence, you are making errors. You might also have been taught by other teachers that you should memorize lists of vocabulary or try and use advanced vocabulary in your answers. A good ex-examiner will be able to spot that immediately and tell you, okay, instead of using this word or this idiom incorrectly, you could have just used a simpler word that you already know and got it correct. And many, many students have great vocabulary, great grammar, great pronunciation, but they just never answer the question. They don't know how to use the structures and the strategies that we've taught in this lesson. If that's the case, you need to be aware of that. You're not going to become aware of that magically by doing this yourself in the mirror at home. So focus on 5 things, not 50 things. One of the biggest problems that we see is students go into the test and they are thinking of 50 different things and hundreds of different idioms and strategies and the vocabulary list with 500 band 9 answers, and they've watched hundreds of different videos all giving them different things. If you just focus on those 5 things and improve those 5 things, I guarantee your score will dramatically improve. Less, but better. That was speaking. Let's move on to IELTS writing, task 2. So we're going to start off with task 2. We'll do task 1 at the end of this video. Task 2 is worth 2/3 of your overall writing score. Task 1 is worth 1/3. And what I encourage students to do is to do task 2 first on test day, because students often start with task 1. They end up getting lost, they lose time, and that means that they mess up task 1 and task 2. So do task 2 first, which is what we're going to do today. What we're going to cover is how to understand the actual question and how to answer the question. Very, very important. We're going to talk a lot about structure, how to develop your sentences and develop your paragraphs, and then give you a complete step-by-step framework for how to answer any question. So I've been teaching IELTS writing task 2 for 20 years, and I have identified some common problems that we see again and again with students who are struggling. And once students fix these problems, they get a band 7, 8, or 9. So let's look at the first problem, which is misunderstanding the question. So about 25% of your total mark for task 2 will be how you respond to the question. In other words, did you actually answer the question or not? So if you don't answer the question, it is impossible for you to get a 7, 8, or 9. Many people, the first big issue is they think they're answering the question, or they don't think that this is a problem. And when we look at their essays, it is very clear that not only have they misunderstood the question, but they haven't actually answered the question on the paper. So the first big problem is just taking the wrong approach by looking at keywords and then writing everything that you know about that keyword. So if you see something about the environment or you see something about education, just vomit all your ideas onto the page. You don't really think about answering the specific question. You're just writing everything you know about that general topic. That is the opposite of what you should do. And the second big problem is not really understanding that there are 5 different types of question. There are opinion questions, discussion questions, problem and solution, advantages and disadvantages, and then what we call 2-part questions. Each of these questions asks you to do different things. For example, problem and solution is asking you to give a problem and a solution. That is very different from discuss the advantages and disadvantages. So if you don't understand the question and the specific thing that they want you to talk about, that often results in a very messy essay that is very difficult to understand, what we call a headache essay. It literally gives the examiners a headache, and you don't want to do that. It leads to lower scores. So how can we overcome that problem? Well, we have a very simple 3-step process. Number 1, identify question type. Is it problem and solution, advantages, disadvantages? What is it actually asking you to do? Then underline the key parts of the question, not the general topics. You're looking for the specific things within that topic that they're asking you to talk about. So for example, should primary school children wear uniforms? So is it asking you about all school children? No, it's asking you about primary school children. It is asking you about primary school children. When children at the primary school level or at school, should they wear uniforms? You must talk about that, and you must answer that specific question. And then you would decide your approach. And there's really only 2 answers to this: yes or no. For this particular question, it is asking you a direct question. So you would pick one, let's say yes, and then you would give your reasons, and then you would give an example. You would plan all of this out before you start writing, and then you will have answered the question by default. It is impossible if you follow that system, to not answer the question. So that brings us to problem number 2, which is essay structure. Why do people get a high score normally for reading, quite a high score for listening, and quite a high score for speaking, but then a much lower score for writing? Why is that? Well, if you think about your whole life, how many hours of English have you listened to? Even if you grew up in a non-English speaking country, you have probably heard and read English for many hundreds or even thousands of hours in your total life. How many hours have you spent writing essays in English? It's probably, for most people, less than 1 hour. So if you were playing sport, if you played tennis for 1,000 hours and you played basketball for 1 hour, which sport are you going to be better at? It's exactly the same with this. So what has this got to do with structures? So structures is a way of showing people how to write who are not naturally good at writing because they haven't been writing that much. The basic structure is introduction, main body paragraph 1, main body paragraph 2, and conclusion. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I've seen other structures that have 3 main bodies, or I've seen a structure that has this or that. This structure, based on 20 years of teaching students, and we have more Band 7, 8, and 9 success stories than any other IELTS company in the world, we have figured out that this structure is the simplest structure that leads to high scores, because you don't want to make your job more complicated than it needs to be. In the introduction, you are introducing what you think about the question. You're stating your position. You're not going to go into detail. The detail comes in main body paragraph 1 and main body paragraph 2. In the conclusion, you are summarizing your position. You're summarizing your main ideas. Now, that is a very 30,000 foot overview of how to write an essay. We're going to go into much more detail now. If you have a look at this, what we do is we take all the different types of question and we just give you the complete structure, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence. We show you what that would look like for a real question, and we give you these flowcharts that just takes the thinking out of it. Now, you want to think during the test, of course, but we want to just make this, again, impossible for you to not do this the right thing. And then we've also given you these little checklists that you can use at home so that you can check while you're practicing exactly what to do. And you can use these checklists to look at your own essays and think, have I done the right thing? Because you don't want to do that on test day. You want to look at everything during practice and give yourself feedback and understand exactly what you're doing during your practice, so that on test day, it's just like riding a bike. You don't think about how to ride a bike, you just do it. So if you want to download all of these, all you have to do is go to the description and you can download those structures. Just give us your email address and we'll email them to you and you can learn from them. But don't download them and think that they're magically going to input into your brain and you're going to magically become better at writing. Watch the rest of this video because there's a lot more important stuff as well. The third big problem that we have is weak paragraph development. So we talked about before about, vomiting all over the page. Not literally, of course, but what students tend to do is they will start their main body paragraphs and they'll just write everything they know about that paragraph. And we also call this the shotgun method. If you think of the difference between a shotgun and a sniper rifle. A shotgun is designed to just spread as many little bullets out as possible and hope that you hit something. Whereas a sniper has one bullet and they are extremely accurate. When students tend to write essays with the shotgun approach, they add as many ideas in as possible into that one paragraph. Whereas a sniper, a Band 9 student, will use one idea in their paragraph and then fully develop that idea. But because a lot of people don't like talking about guns, we've made it nice and friendly for YouTube and we've called it the birthday cake strategy. So think of your main body paragraph like a birthday cake. You have different layers to that cake. Layer 1 is the actual cake inside. So once you have the normal cake, which is your idea, your main idea, you then want to put the icing around it, which is your explanation. You explain why that idea matters or how that idea actually answers the question. You're always linking it back to the question. But now we have the cake, we have the icing. What about the sprinkles? What about the decorations? What about the candles? Those are the examples All right, so we want to have our main idea, our explanation, and then the example. These are things that we can put into our paragraph that support our idea. This is evidence to support and show this is why the idea is actually true. Every paragraph should follow this system. And again, download the structures, it shows it in a lot more detail. But again, just like I said, you can't just download the structures and insert lots of random ideas. You have to think about what you're actually doing with these. So here are some common mistakes that we see even when we give students those structures. Number one is just jumping too quickly to the next idea. So not developing your main ideas with explanations and examples. Second big problem that we see is irrelevant examples. So just because the example is related to the main topic doesn't mean it's related to the actual main idea that it is supporting. So think about this like a chain. The example needs to link to that explanation and the main idea. It should all form a nice chain. Multiple ideas, we've already talked about this, so just like trying to put as many ideas in as possible or not putting any explanations in it at all. Now, how will you know if you're making these mistakes? Well, you can use the checklist, but what I would really recommend is getting feedback from a real ex-examiner. It doesn't have to be us, but if you do use someone, they're going to be able to look at your essay and point out exactly what is wrong with it and show you what to do. If you want that service from us, you have two options. You can just jump into the VIP course. There's a link in the description. It's 10% off, where you will get 5 writing corrections from ex-examiners one-on-one, plus everything else in the VIP course. Or if you don't want to jump into the VIP course immediately, what we do when you join the VIP course, we look at your essay and we look at all of your progress so far in the IELTS test, and we create a study plan and give you feedback on that first essay, showing you exactly what your weaknesses are. You can get that again, go to the description, find that there, and you can join at a much cheaper price than joining the VIP course. So let's get you into our step-by-step system. So this system, if you follow it, you're going to dramatically improve your essays. Step 1, read the question carefully. What is the question actually asking me? And what do they want me to do? What type of question is it? Once you've understood what the question is asking you and the question type, you can move on to step 3, which is 2 main ideas. You don't have to think of 10, 12, 13, 14 different ideas. Just for that particular question, what are 2 of the simplest, most straightforward ideas that actually answer the question? You don't lose marks for having simple ideas. By simplifying your ideas, your whole essay is going to be easier to write and easier to understand. Those are 2 very good things. Step 4, write your introduction. First thing you're going to do is look at the question and you're going to paraphrase it. You're going to write it in your own words. So you're going to change some of the words. And this demonstrates to the examiner that you know how to paraphrase. Just be careful with grammar and vocabulary here. It is better to use simple synonyms and simpler language that is correct than to try and show off and make a bunch of mistakes. Then you are going to state your answer. So it depends on the type of question. If it's asking you for your opinion, you're going to say, for example, I agree for these 2 reasons. These are your 2 main ideas. Or if it says, what's the main advantage and the main disadvantage, you're going to say the main advantage is this and the main disadvantage is this. So you paraphrase the question, you've answered the question, then you can move on to your main body paragraphs. So you're going to state your main idea, you're going to look at your introduction, take the first main idea, then you're going to write that in your topic sentence. You're then going to explain why that main idea actually answers the question, and then you're going to give a specific example. That's your first main body paragraph. Then you're going to move on, you're going to write your second main body paragraph. And that brings us to the final step, which is our conclusion. So you're going to take your main ideas and your answer to the question from the introduction, and you're going to repeat it. Now, many people will tell you, don't repeat words, don't repeat anything in your essay. Your conclusion is a summary. A summary is repeating what is in the rest of the essay. Make sure that you state the main ideas again and make sure it's clear what your answer to your question is in the conclusion. A way to do that is just look at your introduction and paraphrase your introduction. If you want to see what that looks like with real students, I'll put a little pop-up in one of the corners here, and you can see how I went through this step-by-step with a real student. So that's just an overview of Task 2. If you would like a lot more detail, we have a free course called IELTS Essay Builder. If you go to the description, click on the link that says IELTS Essay Builder, it goes into this in a lot more detail. So now you understand Task 2, it is now your job to do Task 1. Academic, click here. General training, click here. Task 1 is different for each of these. They are very, very different. So make sure that you understand first, are you doing academic or general training? If academic, this is the video for you. If general training, this is the video for you.